Hello, everybody. I am Conquering History Games, and welcome to the beginning of the long-awaited, long-hyped Crusader Kings 2 Survivor slash Empire of the Outremer campaign here on the channel. As many of you know, late last year I was talking about how excited I was to start this campaign up. And, well, as has been the case for many of you, I'm sure the first half of 2020 has been a disaster and a nightmare. But, finally, it is going to begin. Now, this is going to be a very long campaign. In fact, I anticipate it will be the longest campaign I've ever done on the channel. Even longer than my Cominian Restoration campaign, which was also in Crusader Kings 2. So you're going to want to settle in and just remember that even though, especially at the beginning, it might at times feel like things are going a little slow, I think it's going to be a really great series. And in fact, talking about my Cominian Restoration campaign, I always have believed that campaign didn't really get going until about episode 15. That's when the really great stuff happened. So I hope that you all will be willing to stick around and join me on this ride. From 1066 to 1453. Now, this first episode is, of course, going to have a lot of me explaining, but I'm sure you guys are down with that. So before I actually go into what character I'm going to play, the two primary achievements, the two important first-tier goals of this campaign is to, number one, get the Survivor achievement, which is where you play a game from 1066 to 1453, which I've never done on YouTube. The second achievement is the DEUS VULT achievement, where you must create the Empire of Outremer, which is basically you have to create a definitive, long-lasting Crusader state. And I'll talk about the details of what that entails when we actually get into our character. And after I've introduced my character that I'm starting as, I'll also explain a lot of the secondary goals, because I have tons of secondary goals, because 1453 is a long way off. So, I suppose I should actually first explain how the Empire of Outremer thing works. So, one of the key things of forming the Empire of Outremer, or at least as far as I'm concerned, is that you want to create the Outremer culture. So forming which is actually not necessary to get the achievement, but I'm going to be doing it the Christian way, where I become a Christian, I start as a Christian, I go on a crusade, and I form the Kingdom of Jerusalem and eventually turn it into the Empire of Outremer. So if I'm going to be doing that, I want to actually form the Outremer culture. So to do that, you have to either be in the Latin group, or be Arabic and have some other requirements. That doesn't really matter because we're going to be doing the Latin group. So the Latin culture group includes the French. Let me double check that. I should have had this pulled up before I even started. But it's going to be a long series. Settle in, boys and girls. Okay, so there's several types, groupings I should say, of cultures. So for example, there is the North Germanic group, which is the Norse, the Swedish, the Danish, etc. The Latin culture group is the one that's needed to form the Outremer culture, and that consists of France, the Normans, the Italians, the Occitanians. Actually, I'm trying to remember, is there a culture map here? Yeah, here we go. Yeah. So, the French, the Normans, the Italians, the Occitanians, the Romans, which don't exist right now, the Dalmatians, which is just this tiny little area here, and the Sardinians. Those are the Latin culture groups, which could then convert to Outremer by decision once you're holding Jerusalem and things like that. So I really thought long and hard about who I wanted to play in the 1066 start, and I decided to go with a character that I think quite a lot of you know, but perhaps don't understand as well as you probably should, at least I think. One of the great characters of the medieval world, Duke Robert the Fox de Hauteville, also known as Robert Guiscard. Yeah, let's just jump in and start playing as him. There's just going to be a little cut here while I make sure that all of the game rules are the way that I want them, and then I'll see you on the other side. Okay, and we're back. So let's talk about my starting character, Duke Robert here, and his family. I'm not going to go into, well, some might say I'm already going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but I'm going to just give some background on him and why I'm going to make some decisions that I'm going to make and why I've chosen him to be the starter. And then after I've done introducing him, I will then talk about some of the secondary achievements that I hope to go for in this campaign. So, Duke Robert the Fox, although the first time I ever read about him, I heard him referred to as the Weasel, but Duke Robert the Fox of Apulia de Hauteville. Robert is a Norman adventurer, you'll notice, Catholic Norman adventurer, but he is not hanging out up here in the north of France like the other Normans are. He is down here in Italy. He's an adventurer. But he was not the first of his family to enter Sicily to attempt to make his fortune. That would have gone to three Hauteville brothers, William, Drogo, and Humphrey, who I'll discuss in detail later. Meaning later is in different episodes. But he was not the first, nor would he be the last. And the family of Duke Robert would be of immense consequence for the Mediterranean for the next several decades from this starting time, and indeed really for centuries. They would fight with or against Christians, both Orthodox and Catholics, as well as Muslims. They transformed the region in profound ways, not only militarily, but in terms of infrastructure and culture. I'm going to start specifically by just talking about the Normans in the 11th century, which is where we are now. They are descendants of the infamous Vikings that ravaged most of Europe during the Viking Age. Because it was in the year 911 where Rollo, one of these invaders, took control of parts of Normandy from Charles the Simple of France. He wasn't the first of the Vikings to enter the France, but he did see it as a potential site of a new homeland for his people. So, Rollo and a lot of immigrants other of the immigrants from the Scandinavian areas converted to Christianity. And even though this was originally done for political purposes within a generation, the Normans seem to have genuinely accepted the cross. In this same way, the Normans abandoned Norse speech in a couple of generations, even in rural areas, such as where the de Hautevilles settled. This is also, now this cultural conversion is really important because they would become interested in French law, which, again, I'm going to talk about in more detail later. I really am a big fan of the Normans, especially the Italian ones, the ones in Italy, I should say. And I'm also going to talk about, in a lot more detail later, the Normans' relationship with Christianity. But the important thing to note here is that the Normans seem to have been infected with this perpetual wanderlust for, maybe we can call it Lebensraum, living space. And so these Normans would, in a matter of generations, occupy spaces that were ranging from the coldness of Scandinavia to the coast and hills of Normandy to the islands of Britannica, the Empire of Britannica, to the mountains of southern Italy, to orange groves in Sicily, to deserts in what is now Syria. There's always somewhere where they wanted to go, and there seemed to be a continuous and steady supply of young men, especially landless ones, who are ready to go and take it. So this is going to inform the way that I play. There's this wanderlust. We want to keep going somewhere else. So we're going to take these group from southern Italy, which themselves already come from France, which came from Norway, and we're going to now take them into the Middle East. And then even after we form Outremer, that's not going to be the end of the campaign because we're going to 1453. So we're going to go even further beyond. Now, to make a long story short, at least for now, about how they actually ended up in Italy, there were Norman pilgrims who met a man named Melus, who was a Lombard who wanted help fighting against the Byzantine Empire. The Norman pilgrims left back to France so they can raise an army, and then they came back. And then they spent the year 1018, which was, that's almost 50 years prior, so by the time we're getting to Duke Robert, things have been going on for a while. They're driving out the Byzantines. And until you hit the Battle of Cannae, which, yes, is just like the one with Hannibal. Almost 1,200 I think it was like 1,200 years later exactly, actually, where the Romans win because of the presence of the Varangian Guard. Melus, the Lombardian guy who had asked the Normans to come help, flees the battle and goes into exile and dies. And so that's the end of the Lombards. But the Normans still stuck around, and they fled to the hills, the knights that were there in that battle, set up a headquarter, and they just waited for new arrivals to come in from France. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Now Robert Guiscard himself, specifically, by the way, we're going to change his name because he's a brand new man, and it's a brand new dynasty, essentially, because he's going to be starting the Normans of the south, of southern Italy, and then later the Normans of the Middle East. To describe what he was like, well, he was somebody who fought a lot of different wars in southern Italy, which, again, I'll talk about more later, and also against the Byzantine Empire. Now, my favorite description of him comes from Anna Komnenos, who was the daughter of Alexis I Komnenos, who I think is, yeah, he's not in charge yet. He's somewhere in the Empire, I think. Yeah. Strategos. Yeah, here he is. I think this is him. Very young. He's only 10 years old right now. But this is the man who would one day be emperor. And it was his daughter who wrote the following about Robert. This Robert was a Norman by descent, of insignificant origin, in temper tyrannical, in mind most cunning, brave in action, very clever in attacking the wealth and substance of magnates, most obstinate in achievement, for he did not allow any obstacle to prevent his executing his desires. His stature was so lofty that he surpassed even the tallest. His complexion was ruddy, his hair flaxen, his shoulders were broad, his eyes all but emitted sparks of fire, and in frame he was well built where nature required breadth, and was neatly and gracefully formed where less width was necessary. So from tip to toe this man was well proportioned, as I have repeatedly heard many say. Now Homer says of Achilles that when he shouted, his voice gave his hearers the impression of a multitude in an uproar, but this man's cry is said to have put thousands to flight. Thus equipped by fortune, physique, and character, he was naturally indomitable and subordinate to nobody in the world. Powerful natures are ever like this, people say, even though they be of somewhat obscure descent. And I think that's much better than anything I can come up with to say. That's our boy Robert, who we're going to be starting as. So with that introduction of him and his family, there's two things that I want to do. The first thing is I want to create a House Guiscard to differentiate ourselves from the Hautevilles of France. And that also means I'm going to have to come up with a new shield. And then I'm going to talk about our secondary goals in this campaign. And we're back with the House Guiscard emblem. I've made it a red lion over a blue field, mostly just because I think it looks cool. The red lion will conquer much in the name of Christianity. So, let's talk about achievements I'm going to be going for. Now, some of these achievements I already have, but it's just basically secondary goals for the campaign besides the Survivor and DEUS VULT achievements. Number 1. You will see that we have no historical bloodline. I can't believe he doesn't have one. But we're going to try to work on that. We're going to try to form some of our own bloodlines. But in terms of history goes, we're going to go for the History is in My Blood achievement, where we'll attempt to have 5 historical bloodlines in our character. We're in the High Middle Ages. There's a fair amount of historical bloodlines that are around, some of which have quite a few living descendants. We might be able to pull some stuff off, and I actually have kind of a priority list of which ones that I want to specifically go for, because I think they'll help us in the conquest, where we take the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and then all our holy wars and fighting that we're going to be doing moving forward from that. So History is in My Blood is what we're going to go for. I'm probably going to go for Protector of the Holy Places, which is where you have to own Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina, as well as Rome itself, which would be tricky because the papacy is in charge. I'm going to go into more detail about why I will or will not go for that achievement later. Of course, we're going to go for the Crusader King achievement. It's going to be pretty damn important, or else we're not going to be able to get the Outremer one, but starting in the High Middle Ages, which we are, become the owner of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. We're gonna go for Saint, which is a single as a single character. Achieve 10,000 piety. I'm sure we might be able to pull that off at some point. Also, Divine Blood. I don't think we're gonna have to specifically do anything. It should happen on its own. But Divine Blood is where you have a score of 100,000 total. During my Cominian Restoration campaign, I think I had an Emperor at one point later on in the game that single-handedly almost hit 100,000, so that's definitely going to be doable. We're going to maybe go for Beyond the Indus, which is as a non-Indian culture, conquer a kingdom title in India. There's plenty of them, so maybe we'll go for Sindh or Punjab, something like that. Which of course is way beyond what it is to be the Empire of Outremer, so we would have to go pretty far east to go for that one. By the Gods, where you have to gain the Theologian trait, so that's a thing where you go for the theology focus and eventually you can do it. It takes a long time, so it helps if you start young. So I'd probably have to specifically have a character who I'm going to be trying to do that with. And in a related way, I also am going to go for the achievement from Servant to Saint, have a character you used to play be proclaimed a saint and have their saintly bloodline running through your veins. So that's one of the ways that we might just forge our own bloodline. And then I don't have it on here. Why did I not write it in my notes? Maybe I found out it wasn't actually possible. But the one where you are bordering Metaphysite, Abyssinia. So basically coming down here a little bit into Africa, and maybe we'll come over here into Africa. I don't know. It's a flexible game. We might end up going into Siberia for all we know, up towards Mongolia. Now, in terms of things that are not specifically achievements, but things that I would like to try to do, is when we take Jerusalem, of course Jerusalem is going to be the capital, I would like to build a great work down here, specifically a great, well, it won't be a mosque, but like a great cathedral, and try to build it all the way up to level 4. I think a few hundred years is plenty of time to get that done. Now, earlier I talked about the Protector of the Holy Places. I may or may not go for Rome. I wouldn't do that if I was Catholic, but if I get the event where I could turn Fraticelli, which is the heresy of Catholicism that still allows you to form the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Empire of Outremer, I'm absolutely going to do that, because I think it would be really, really fun. Just this idea of a heretical version of Catholicism forming the great Empire of Outremer, and then establishing itself as the new mainstream. Because for those of you who are not aware, when you play as a heresy and your moral authority, actually, is it the moral authority? No, I think it's if more people or more counties believe in the heresy or something like that. I'll have to look up the exact details, but I've done it before. There will be a switch over where the heresy becomes the new normal. I don't think there's any heresies that actually spawned here. But an example of that would be like over here, there's the Nestorians in India. So if you saw my St. Thomas's Dream campaign, I actually became a Messalian Christian ruler, which is a heresy of Nestorianism. And because Nestorianism is not really, like, there's just some over here, that's it. It's not a very big religion. I was very quickly able to have more characters and more counties that believed in that version of the faith, and so then I swapped it. So for example, these Catholics here, they have the yellow cross, and then if you're a heretic, it's the pink. If I became Fraticelli and it became the mainstream version of Catholicism under than me, the Fraticelli logo would turn yellow. Okay, so yeah, definitely going to turn Fraticelli if I get the event for it. And one of my favorite things to do, I'm also going to attempt to convert as many counties as possible to my culture and my religion. So, of course, this is all basically Muslim right now, but I also want to convert the culture as well. So, like, you have Levantine here, Egyptian, Bedouin. Screw all that. I want this all to be Outremer, the fusion of the Near East culture with the Latin culture that will reign for 1,000 years if I can help it. Now, let's actually talk about specifically, because I don't want there to be misunderstandings, what does it take to form the Empire of Outremer? Well, number one, for some reason, you can't be playing in an alternate start. I don't know if that means you can't start on a bookmark, or if that means that you can't have, like, a mod or whatever. Your character has to be an adult, so no kid emperors. You have to be independent. You have to be at peace. You have to have 5,000 prestige. You have to control the county of Jerusalem, and I believe it's that you have to personally control it. And you have to have complete control of the Near East region. Now, regions could be kind of difficult for people to understand, like when they're going for the conquering Mongolia thing, for example. So what it means is to control the entirety of the Near East region means that I've got to have complete control. And I'm talking down to the cities and mosques and stuff. You know, got to get rid of the assassins or whatever. But you have to hold Arabia, Mesopotamia, which Iraq, that's what it means, I think, Yemen, Jerusalem, Syria, and not Egypt, but you do have to have the Duchy of Sinai here. You also have to be either Catholic or, as I said earlier, Fraticelli. You have to own a kingdom or empire title that is in the Near East region, which is kind of a strange concept that, like, why would you... I guess it's that, let's say you were doing a huge Britannia run, and then you just happen to control these, but you didn't personally own them, like these vassals. You could not then form the empire. You also cannot form the Empire of Outremer if you are the Byzantine Empire, like if you have that title, or the Holy Roman Empire, or the Roman Empire. So you're disqualified from doing it. And of course, you can't form the Empire of Outremer if the Empire of Outremer has already been created. Now, the effects that will happen is that the Empire of Outremer, which will be a new custom thing, so like, you know, there's like the Arabian and Persian ones here, for example. There's going to be a new thing that spawns here, the de jure. The Empire of Outremer will become your primary title. It will destroy any other held empires I had. So, for example, if I did the one, I think it's called Looking East and West, where you control an empire title in India and also the Persia one, that's not going to happen. But just for example, it would destroy those. And any kingdom title that I have that's in the Near East region will de jure become part of the Empire of Outremer. So like, so like you see how the Arabian Empire has these borders. It doesn't include Iraq and things like that. We're going to ideally smash this, to destroy this, so like the Arabian Empire here, all this will become the kind of white color of Outremer. And most importantly, because it's going to, forming Outremer, that's the drinking game for the series. Every time I say Outremer, drink, and then don't send me your medical bills. But every time, whenever you form the Empire of Outremer, the most important thing, I think, because the concept is that it's showing the definitive victory of Christianity over Islam in the region, is it will destroy all the caliphates. So the Shia, the Sunni, the Ibadi, the Qajarajite, and the Hurafu sheikdoms will all be destroyed. Not that those all exist at the start, but they'll just be gone. It is ended. The mainstream Islam. Now I don't know. Who knows what could happen during the game? Maybe the Muslims will like extend out here into India, but there will be no caliphate there. So it just completely destroys their authority in the region. And then I think they actually can still create caliphate titles, but there's something that they do, I don't remember right now, that makes it very difficult. So like if there's going to be like a Islamic revival, it's almost impossible. And what will also happen when you form the Empire of Outremer is you'll get a custom bloodline, which we don't really need to talk about now, but you know, as if you couldn't catch it from everything that I've been talking about, I want to have, I guess, like a dozen bloodlines by the time I get to the end of the game, or something like that. Okay, so is there anything else I want to go into? So short-term goals, yeah, like when are we actually going to get started on this? Well, the way I want to go for the Empire of Outremer is, while technically I can go after, start expanding right now into these Muslim-held areas, I want to do it via Crusade, because I think it'll just start things off with a bang. Now, Crusades don't start until after 1090, and will usually not really begin until about 1200, at least when you're starting here. So we've got At minimum, 24 years to kill, probably more like 34 years to kill. Robert himself is probably not going to live to see the start of the Crusades. So essentially, we've got a generation to prepare because we want when the Crusade to be called, we want to get the Crusader state that is created out of it. And I want to start it with the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Now, the AI has a habit of sometimes going for Egypt, but we want to make sure that we have enough piety, because you have enough piety, you can like convince the Pope to change the target. So we're going to want to start with Jerusalem, but it doesn't really matter too much, because whoever, if we're the biggest contributor, we're going to become the head of the kingdom, be it Egypt or Jerusalem, and then we will get a custom bloodline, which is going to increase the damage that we do to religious enemies. Because one of the biggest things that's going to make this so difficult is, in real life, the Crusader states failed. And they were for lots of different reasons. But I'll tell you what, being an isolated Christian kingdom that is hundreds of miles from major support and surrounded by Islamic enemies, it's a tough time. Especially because once we do take Jerusalem, the jihads are going to get called, and we're going to be having to fend off Muslims constantly, and it's hard enough to expand out into the Muslim world without them forcing you on the defensive in the first place. So having the bloodline of founding the kingdom and becoming a Crusader king, it gives other bonuses too, but the increased damage to religious enemies is going to be a big part of being able to survive and then expand outwards. I think the key here really is going to be we've got to break the backs of the Fatimids and the Seljuk. If we can kind of turn the Muslim world into a bunch of small scattered areas, then I think we're going to be in a relatively good spot. It also will help if they fight each other. So, for example, we have Ibrahim of the Ghaznavid out here. He's way out here. This is definitely not territory that I need to take to form Outremer. So with some luck, he's going to be fighting the Seljuks and keeping them off of me a little bit. All right. I know we didn't unpause, but there was just so much setup that I wanted to get into, and I hope you will forgive me for it. But I'm very, very excited for this series. Going to be talking about a lot of history of the Normans and the Crusader states as we form them. But I think that I have come up with enough different tiers of goals that it's not going to become like really boring once I form Jerusalem. Like another thing that I want to do is I want to form the Kingdom of Sicily. Like I'm going to be expanding while we wait for the Crusades because I want to be as strong as possible. But I also think it would be fun if while we are forming Outremer, if we have some family members who we leave behind, because I ideally am going to want to switch over to a beneficiary. Because I think it would be fun and cool to leave behind a family member in charge of the Kingdom of Sicily and see how he or she does with the dynasty, and like we could have these two Guiscard kingdoms. But I think I hope that it'll be able to entertain you all. I promise in the next episode we're going to unpause. I'm going to start making a lot of key marriages. As you can see, we have a lot of siblings and a lot of children, and plenty of my siblings have children too. So we've got a lot of marrying to do. I want to make an absolutely enormous family tree. And we're going to try to pick up as many historical bloodlines as possible quickly, get them into our family, and get their bloodlines attached to the Guiscard dynasty so that we don't have to worry about them going extinct. Because there are quite a few historical bloodlines, but some of them are kind of on their last legs down here. Now, one who, he's not the best in the world, by the way, but I just think it would be cool if we can get him, just because I really like the poem. We've got El Cid Rodrigo Diaz out here. He has founded his bloodline. It's very hard to get him to invite your kingdoms because he's usually put on the council and other things like that, but I would love it if we can get his blood. And plus, you know, the morale... The moral defense of plus 5% will really help, but it's mostly a prize thing. I would just really like to get him. So, thank you for joining me. I am Conquering History Games. It's going to be a long one. This might be who knows, we might be talking like triple-digit video count here. So please be sure to subscribe if you have not already, and click that bell and personalize the notifications so you'll always be notified whenever a new video in this series goes up. I'm going to try to have part 2 of this actually come up today so that you can actually see some action. Yeah, nothing more to say. You all have yourselves a wonderful day, And always be sure to check the community tab for any updates in change of schedule. All right, wow, that ended up being my usual half-hour long intro anyway, didn't it? You all have yourselves a wonderful day and a wonderful life. Bye.